We'll get straight into it if that's okay by you, madam.
It's fine. It's fine. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Lend Your Voice 1000 Voices for Autism series, proudly brought to you by AK Foundation for Autism. My name is Epic, and today we are hosting this conversation alongside the amazing, the more brighter face you can see at the end of your screen, with the smile that is heavenly and divine, guaranteeing that we are going to have not just an educative conversation, but one that we are thoroughly going to enjoy. I'm joined today by the amazing Madam Amaka Confidence Biwu. Madam, you are most welcome to the Lend Your Voice 1000 Voices for Autism series. How are you doing this beautiful?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
It's an honor to have you on here. First things first, we want to say a big thank you to you for finding time to do this with us. It's usually this happens on a Thursday, on a weekday. It's noon. Normally, a lot of people will find this pretty inconveniencing with the schedules. But finding time to have this conversation with us, it's a clear indication that you understand the impact of conversations like this, and we appreciate you anything for that. We say thank you again for finding time to join us.
All right, sir. Thank you.
So yes, it's the Lend Your Voice 1000 Voices for Autism, proudly brought to you by AK Foundation for Autism. It's our own little way to champion or advocate for people living within the autism spectrum in Nigeria and across Africa. And we use this opportunity as a digital advocacy medium to continue to share the light on these conversations, to reach out to as many people who are on the spectrum and who are willing to know more about autism and how it affects the lives of regular people. The goal is to continue to amplify the living conditions of people living with autism using education and conversations that enlighten society as a tool that drives and champions this goal. Today we are joined, as I said earlier, by Madam Amaka. A little bit of insight before she does most of her introduction. Madam Amaka is a special needs expert, and that is pretty interesting, but I'll allow her to go in depth on the introduction, so she highlights the journey so far, where it all started for her. And all. Madam Maka, please, but I appreciate you coming now. How did it all start for you? Where did it all begin? And what prompted your journey as an expert in special education?
Okay. Why the network is not quite stable, I don't know if it's the same at that end. Okay. So I'll start by introducing myself. I didn't hear much of the things you said. My connection is quite okay here. I don't know for there. So my name is Amaka Confidence Obimogu, like you have rightly introduced me. I am a special education needs expert and an educational psychologist. Over the years, I have worked and supported learners with autism, learners that are autistic, and offering intervention procedures and tailored support to help them in mainstream classroom and maximize their potentials effectively. So thank you so much, Mr., for having me here again. And I'm open to any question and every question that will be asked today, and trusting that we'll be able to offer good interpretation and answers to them. Okay.
Amazing. We are confident that it's going to be a very interesting session, because this particular conversation has been titled Inclusion in Education. We want to highlight the importance of building an educational system where children on the spectrum are well included and are part of the learning process in an educational system. Before we begin, I want us to start off on a very, very what I might consider a lighter note. I would appreciate it if you give us an in-depth idea of what you think inclusion in education means for children on the spectrum. Because so our guests follow the conversation all the way. What do you think? What would you say? What would you consider an inclusive educational environment should feel like for children on the spectrum?
Okay, an inclusive educational environment for children at the spectrum should integrate a number of factors. Okay, so first of all, the children at the spectrum, there must be a time, a particular time that, okay, it has to be identified that, okay, this learner has, this learner is susceptible to autism, right? So, first of all, to start with, we cannot just get up and then say, okay, this learner is autistic. So to start with, we must look out for the caregivers, those that are in charge of the learner, right, from infancy. And then by experience, I've come to understand that majority of them see those early signs, right? They see those early signs right from infancy, and then, but sometimes ignorance plays a key role, and they are not able to identify, or they are not able to a kind of say, okay, this is what is wrong, right? So it has to start from there, and then if the people involved in the foundational stage of the learner's or the child's life are able to be aware of it, that is where it starts, right? So it becomes a problem if they are not aware of it, or if they are ignorant of it. And sometimes they come to school, they are put into the mainstream classroom, nobody knows what is happening, and they just come in, then a lot of struggles and everything that is not accrued to the normal learning procedure starts occurring. So before I talk about what it is for them, what inclusive learning is for the learners at the spectrum, it's expedient to highlight on this basic foundation, right? So the people that are involved at the foundational stage of the learner's life, are they aware? Okay, are they aware, okay, that this child is on spectrum, or that something is wrong? Because if they're aware, then when they come to the mainstream classroom, there will be a kind of structured and understanding adjustment to be made. Okay, so now I'm going to what inclusive learning it's all about for autistic learners. Like you asked, what are you mean the approaches, right? You mean the approaches, right?
Yes, and the approach, what the schedules, the routine, and remember, it's an educational. It's not. We are not looking at it from a from an intervention center perspective. It's what it should
Okay.
feel like when we have a full classroom with neurotypical and also neurodivergent children in the same classroom.
Okay.
How,
Okay.
how
Okay.
work so that the neurodivergent child is comfortable and learns adequately? What should they expect in that kind of environment?
Okay, so in that case, we are jumping the process now to what it should be in the classroom. Okay, so for it to be made inclusively for learners that are autistic, there's what we call universal design for learning, right? So in this universal design for learning, it actually entails different means of presentation, or different means of presenting learning in a more engaging manner for the autistic learners. First of all, autistic learners, autism comes in different stages, or if I may put it, in different levels. There are ones that are mild, like you already know, right? There are severe. Okay, so there are just moderate. So it depends on the that is why it's even called spectrum in the first place. So depending on the area that this learner falls in, right? So there should be what we call universal design for learning, UDL. In this design, what happens there is that specialists and educationists that has the professional training in this area, they liars around with the teachers, with the education administrators, and set up multiple means of engagement. Right. So when we say multiple means of engagement, it means um, other areas, other things that can be embedded to make learning more meaningful. Some of them are visual learners, some are more prone to audio, some are good in reading and text. So before the universal design for learning can be planned, we need to understand the spectrum that this learner falls in. And then another thing we have to take quite cognizance of is what we call differentiated instruction. Okay, so we have to, in differentiated instruction, it has to do with adjusting content, the content of the learning, adjusting the process and the outputs, like making being flexible, putting flexibility in what the teacher does in the classroom, in the mainstream classroom, right? So that is one of the reasons why it is quite very important to make sure that all the stakeholders that are involved should be carried along, whether the child is coming from the early intervention center to the mainstream classroom, or the child is just coming from home to the mainstream classroom. Everybody has to be involved in making sure that this works perfectly, and then follow through with the recommendations that will be coming from the professionals. Okay, so they are also having issues with communication. So communication is an integral part of it. In communication, speech therapists can be employed. Speech therapists ensure that this works perfectly, and then follow through with the recommendations that will be the process and the outputs, like making being flexible, putting flexibility in what the teacher does in the classroom, in the mainstream classroom, right? So that is one of the reasons why it is quite very important to make sure that all the stakeholders that are involved should be carried along, whether the child is coming from the early intervention center to the mainstream classroom, or the child is just coming from home to the mainstream classroom. Everybody has to be involved in making sure that this works perfectly, and then follow through with the recommendations that will be coming from the professionals. Okay, that is where it starts. Good interpretation and answers to them. Okay.
Amazing, amazing. We are confident that it's going to be a very interesting session, because this particular conversation has been titled Inclusion in Education. We want to highlight the importance of building an educational system where children on the spectrum are well included and are part of the learning process in an educational system. Before we begin, I want us to start off on a very, very what I might consider a lighter note. I would appreciate it if you give us an in-depth idea of what you think inclusion in education means for children on the spectrum. Because so our guests follow the conversation all the way. What do you think? What would you say? What would you consider an inclusive educational environment should feel like for children on the spectrum?
Okay, an inclusive educational environment for children at the spectrum should integrate a number of factors. Okay, so first of all, the children at the spectrum, there must be a time, a particular time that, okay, it has to be identified that, okay, this learner this learner is susceptible to autism, right? So first of all, to start with, we cannot just get up and then say, okay, this learner is autistic. So to start with, we must look out for the caregivers, those that are in charge of the learner, right, from infancy. And then by experience, I've come to understand that majority of them see those early signs, right? They see those early signs right from infancy, and then, but sometimes ignorance plays a key role, and they are not able to identify, or they are not able to a kind of say, okay, this is what is wrong, right? So it has to start from there, and then if the people involved in the foundational stage of the learner's or the child's life are able to be aware of it, that is where it starts, right? So it becomes a problem if they are not aware of it, or if they are ignorant of it. And sometimes they come to school, they are put into the mainstream classroom, nobody knows what is happening, and they just come in, then a lot of struggles and everything that is not accrued to the normal learning procedure starts occurring. So before I talk about what it is for them, what inclusive learning is for the learners at the spectrum, it's is expedient to highlight on this basic foundation, right? So the people that are involved at the foundational stage of the learner's life, are they aware? Okay, are they aware, okay, that this child is on spectrum, or that something is wrong? Because if they're aware, then when they come to the mainstream classroom, there will be a kind of structured and understanding adjustment to be made. Okay, so now I'm going to what inclusive learning it's all about for autistic learners. Like you asked, what are you mean the approaches, right? You mean the approaches, right?
Yes, the approach, what the schedules, the routine, and remember, it's an educational. It's not. We are not looking at it from a from an intervention center perspective. It's what it should
Okay.
feel like when we have a full classroom with neurotypical and also neurodivergent children in the same classroom.
Okay.
How,
Okay.
how
Okay.
work so that the neurodivergent child is comfortable and learns adequately? What should they expect in that kind of environment?
Okay, so in that case, we are jumping the process now to what it should be in the classroom. Okay, so for it to be made inclusively for learners that are autistic, there's what we call universal design for learning, right? So in this universal design for learning, it actually entails different means of presentation, or different means of presenting learning in a more engaging manner for the autistic learners. First of all, autistic learners, autism comes in different stages, or if I may put it, in different levels. There are ones that are mild, like you already know, right? There are severe. Okay, so there are just moderate. So it depends on the that is why it's even called spectrum in the first place. So depending on the area that this learner falls in, right? So there should be what we call universal design for learning, UDL. In this design, what happens there is that specialists and educationists that has the professional training in this area, they liaise around with the teachers, with the education administrators, and set up multiple means of engagement, right? So when we say multiple means of engagement, it means um, other areas, other things that can be embedded to make learning more meaningful. Some of them are visual learners, some are more prone to audio, some are good in reading and text. So before the universal design for learning can be planned, we need to understand the spectrum that this learner falls in. And then another thing we have to take quite cognizance of is what we call differentiated instruction. Okay, so we have to, in differentiated instruction, it has to do with adjusting content, the content of the learning, adjusting the process and the outputs, like making being flexible, putting flexibility in what the teacher does in the classroom, in the mainstream classroom, right? So that is one of the reasons why it is quite very important to make sure that all the stakeholders that are involved should be carried along, whether the child is coming from the early intervention center to the mainstream classroom, or the child is just coming from home to the mainstream classroom. Everybody has to be involved in making sure that this works perfectly, and then follow through with the recommendations that will be coming from the professionals. Okay, so they are also having issues with communication. So communication is an integral part of it. In communication, speech therapists can be employed. Speech therapists, yeah, there are people that are quite in charge of it. Psychologists and specialists can actually combine both occupational therapy and the behavioral therapy together. So communication support is quite integral. And then also because they are sensory sensitive, right? So sensory friendly strategies has to be employed to make them to learn maximally like others. Like, for example, having a calm corners or sensory breaks, or sensory tools like headphones, fidgets, just making the environment adjustable for them to cope. Okay, so that's what inclusion is all about. It's not just what it's called inclusion because you want to integrate them into the mainstream classroom. That's why it's called inclusion. And then profile further supports apart from what others are doing, but they should not be secluded. And in this inclusion we are talking about, even their classmates or their peers or whoever that are with in the class should be strategies should be put forth by the school administrators to make sure that even pupils and students are sensitized on what this is all about, so that they will be able to, empathize with their classmate, because we have had issues and cases where autistic learners are being bullied, right? Or even called crazy, or even called, students go home and then talk about them. There is this child in my class that doesn't just stay, and autism sometimes come with ADHD characteristics and attributes. So some of them are quite attention deficit and hyperactive in nature, depending on the spectrum, actually. So I don't know if I've answered some of the questions you asked. Yeah.
Yes, you have, madam. And I think we have started on a very, very strong. You have extensively gone into details on practical steps in which can be implemented while still addressing the idea of inclusion, which is what I wanted to get, the idea of what inclusion feels like and feels around. You have not just answered that, you have gone into naming practical strategies that can be implemented in schools, which we're going to get to, but we'll still get to that so that you have more extensive time to go into more specific detail about those details that you have mentioned. But let's talk about something. And there's something that is recurring, because we run an early intervention center, mainstream school side. They think it's all about just saying that we are an inclusive environment. They take children on the
Yeah.
spectrum, integrate them into mainstream without making adequate preparations, settling the environment, making those things that some
Exactly.
of these things now made available. They're not made available, and they just bring children into these spaces. And some of these
Yeah.
children, some might be phobic or exhibit one or two things. They can't cope in that mainstream environment. They start to regress. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it. between not just integrating children on the spectrum into mainstream environment, but actually making the need for making the environment inclusive by setting up systems that are accommodating for these children. I would like for you to highlight the differences between proper inclusion and just mere integration into that, and why it is important that this thing is paid attention to and the impact it has on the.
Okay, that's a very it's a very integral part of this section. Actually, the transition of autistic learners to early intervention centers, right? Like the mainstream classroom, right? Yes. So that transition is quite critical. It's very critical, and not just critical, it's also a very complex process. It's quite complex in nature. So because every people, all the stakeholders involved they have to understand what it is, what is involved. Okay, so who are these stakeholders? The people at the early intervention centers and the professionals there, the therapists there, the psychologists there, the speech therapists, the occupational therapists, and all of that, the behavioral therapists. And then another one that's quite important, that the people that has to be carried along are the parents or the caregivers of the learner in question. Okay, so then the school administration of the school or the learning point or the learning platform where the learner from the early intervention center is being transferred to. So the journey is quite complex, and is one that has to be quite detailed, that has to be followed process by process with all the things involved, making sure that everyone is carried along. Okay, so first of all, these early intervention services, like we already know, it begin in infancy, depending on how each platform runs their own, right? So the objectives at that stage, one of the objectives or few of the objectives at that stage that must have been put in place, or things that has to have been accomplished before even considering transferring this learner to the mainstream classroom. Has the communication skill and social skill of that autistic learner, has it been worked on effectively? And then about the challenging behavior? Has routines and the structures that can minimize it, have they been put in place? And then have these learners been encouraged for what we call functional independence? Like, mainstream classroom that's why we call it inclusive. Both neurodivergent learners and other learners are there. So there must be this readiness. Then we now talk about the transition planning. So what happens here is that we have to consider the components of the planning in order to make out something meaningful when they transition. Okay, so what are the components of the planning in this transition stage? Okay, we have what we call multidisciplinary assessment. We have what we call individualized education plan, or the equivalent. These ones they are very common, right? So then there should be a collaboration between the EI centers, like the early intervention center and the mainstream school. Then there is something very important and pivotal. That is gradual exposure, the gradual exposure to the mainstream setting. Okay, the early intervention center will not just wake up one day and take the learners to the mainstream setting. Okay, there should be a gradual exposure. So the mainstream classroom, right? When these learners are getting to, I think some of them stays like 4 to 6 years in the early intervention center, right? Right? Yes, depending. Yes. Okay. Okay. So when they are gradually coming to that stage where they have to be transferred to the mainstream classroom, there should be what we call gradual exposure. So once in a while, they will have to go to the mainstream classroom, though they are still in the early intervention center, right? So they have to be exposed to what the classroom entails, what it's all about. They have to, meet the teachers there, just before they come, there should be a structure on ground in the mainstream also to attend to the learners or the learner. Okay, so that's why I said that it's quite a complex one and one that involves so many processes. So before the learner himself or herself attends the mainstream school, okay, so possibly a shadow teacher, that is what we call shadow teacher, depending on the spectrum, depending on how this learner has been able to cope in the early intervention center, they can be provided with a shadow teacher for the meantime in the mainstream to accompany them or accompanying him or her to the mainstream classroom. Okay, so the goal is for full participation in the academic and social life. Okay, so I think I don't know if I give a cogent point on that.
Madam, well said, madam. I think you have pointed some aspects of the conversation that we'll definitely delve more into. You've mentioned transition planning. You've highlighted some of the components of the planning, the multidisciplinary access, and all that. You've referenced shadow teachers. We'll get into all of that as the conversation thrives. I wanted us to step back a little bit and let's talk about common misconceptions, right? Autism is very, very
Okay.
sensitive across in Nigeria and even globally. And the one thing that is prevalent is the fact that a lot of people do not entirely understand in detail what they should about. Help us highlight some common misconceptions that parents and educators might have about what inclusion should be. And can we debunk these things on here? Just help us with some common misconceptions that you had and that which we can debunk on here about the idea of inclusion generally across special education needs.
Okay, common misconceptions that educators or parents might have about inclusion generally, right?
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah. So, one of the misconception I think I can point out now is the fact that inclusion is all about um, making the autistic learner to be perfect overnight. Right? It's not. Okay, this is a process. So inclusion is not just about making an autistic learner. They are already these autistic learners or any other learner that is neurodivergent in nature. Like we advocate that they are just neurodivergent in nature, that they're different in their own way. Okay, it's not like there is principally something so wrong. Okay, so since they are neurodivergent, they should strategies and procedures to help them learn in their own way should be devised, right? Just like um, I am, I am a woman, right? I'm chocolate in color, and I'm dark and tall, right? Another person is a woman. She's light skinned. Okay, she's average height. Are we the same?
No.
We are different, but we are all women, isn't it? So that
Yes.
is the concept we want to sell out there, that these are neurodivergent learners. They learn differently, not as if they are abnormal. So what we are trying to advocate over the years is for institutions and learning platforms to come to the understanding that this kind of people exist and they have to be included in the classroom. And since they have to be included in the mainstream classroom, even those pupils that are not neurodivergent, I hope you know that they have their different learning styles as well.
Absolutely.
they are all different, right? So autistic learners or other special education learners, their case is not different too. That's where inclusion comes in. So the misconception that has to be debunked is that there should be a perfect work overnight so that autistic learners will become like every other person. Even other learners in the class are not the same. So that's one of the misconceptions about inclusive learning. Another one I can say now, another misconception is the fact that inclusive learning has to be taking contents and procedures that are accrued, or that contents, procedures, and it may be, let's say, plannings that you use in the classroom for others, that it should also be for use for the autistic learners. It should be used, but because we are talking about neurodivergency and we are talking about being different, there should be a kind of structure. There should be a kind of like, how do I put it now? Adjustment.
Yeah.
There should be a kind of adjustment to fit what we are aiming at. Okay? So I think there are basically a number of misconceptions that you encounter on the field, right? You just basically maybe mindset of people, how they see things differently. Like, okay, people even see things differently. So why should we are not all the same? So these are some of them you encounter them in the field, some of them people voice it out. So, but the most important thing is for you to stick to what you know and keep on updating yourself on the new trends of what is in vogue.
Well said, brilliantly said, madam. I love how you have pointed out two very recurring misconceptions, not just for educators, but also parents. And it's practical that parents tend to hope, because they are hopeful for a transition. Sometimes they misunderstand the process and think it's a quick fix. They think it's something that you can wave a wand around and there's perfection immediately. And I love how you have addressed that common misconception. And secondly, you have also highlighted the importance of specifically tailored instruction to these children. It's not a generalistic thing. People learn differently. And prompted my next question, which is teachers are not therapists, right? That transition from an intervention center to a mainstream school for the child who is at an early intervention center, they tend to interact a lot with therapists who are well aware. Now that transition to a mainstream school, they're now interacting with a teacher. Probably some might have, as you mentioned earlier, shadow training, shadow learning, and all that. But in the mainstream class, you're interacting with a teacher. As one who has vast experience in special education, what are the things you would encourage teachers of mainstream schools to be well aware about when welcoming children who are on the spectrum? Because for some of them, it's going to be the first time, right? Some teachers encounter this first time, and it's not a bad thing that they might not have heard about autism before. For some of them, it might be their first interaction with an autistic child. How would you see teachers who are about to interact with an autistic child or welcome an autistic child into the classroom? How can they prepare for this experience to ensure that they help navigate the learning for that child as effectively as the rest of the class?
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very good question, and like we earlier established at the onset, that this is a complex matter, and there are challenges that accompanies it, right? So we're going to talk about like you propose now, how teachers can be prepared maximally, right? So to receive these learners into the mainstream classroom. Okay. So we know that first of all, mainstream classroom, there is this high social functioning ongoing. Mainstream classroom generally, right? There is high social functioning that is ongoing, which we know that is one of the weaknesses of autistic learners. Okay, so first of all, before these learners are integrated into the mainstream classroom, that was why I started by saying that there should be there should be all the stakeholders involved should come together to plan for it. So even the teachers where the learners are being transferred to should know what is happening. They should be pre-informed and they should be trained. If you ask me, I don't think it's wise or quite professional enough to take a child from an intervention center and just go to a mainstream classroom or mainstream school that you don't know if they have any orientation about special need learners or autistic learners and just integrate them there. I think it's not an acceptable one to do. So the mainstream school that they're being taken to should be a mainstream school that has inclusive platform, have been sensitized on what it entails, and their teachers have been trained on the way forward, even if it's not like even if they don't have a vast knowledge on it, but at least how to manage it. Since, okay, any school that have accepted to be an inclusive school should be prepared for it. So the problem we have is that sometimes these learners they come from home directly to this mainstream classroom, no prior awareness of whatsoever, both from the parent side, both from the teacher side. But there should be an advantage if they are coming from an early intervention center to the mainstream classroom. There should be an advantage in the sense that the early intervention center has what it takes to give a thorough orientation to that school if they don't have that awareness and orientation. I don't know if you get my point.
I do. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so that's it. Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to let you finish because I was following what you were saying. I thought you were not done. That's why.
Okay.
But yeah, you've highlighted from what you have said. I think you have said that the center should take on responsibility to help it do the necessary education if the child is being enrolled in a mainstream school that is not well aware of the requirements. Okay, pretty interesting opinion, and I think I like the idea where you have shaped the conversation to highlighting the responsibility of not just the mainstream school but also the center beyond the primary care they provide. In that transition, they also play a very vital role. At some point in the conversation, we were talking about you addressed the need for empathy when you spoke about the classroom and all the other colleagues in the class. I have a question about that, but before we take that, let me say that whoever has been listening to all our guests, viewers listening, if you have questions, the conversation has been on for over 30 minutes now. It's Madam Maka at the other side of the conversation. If you have any questions for her, please do also drop them in the comment section. We'll take them before the conversation is done. And I'm sure she'll be ready, as she said earlier, to answer as many questions as you have. So, Madam Maka, so yes, my question. You were talking about empathy, right? What role does empathy play in teaching inclusively? Why is it important? And how can teachers cultivate this idea, this mindset of empathy towards children in the spectrum?
Okay. That's a very vital question. And I think I like that question specifically. You know what? Without empathy, I don't think it's possible. Yeah. So even professionals on this learning area, Okay, for you to even have the passion to go into this, you must be very empathetic. Okay, so empathy is what must, in fact, one of the main things to be considered, both from the professionals, both on the side of the teachers. So how can we build this empathy, right? I think that empathy, if I'm not mistaken, it's a natural disposition. Am I correct?
I missed that. I missed that. What you say, madam? My network is bit.
Network
Yes, I missed what you said. You said empathy is what?
is a natural disposition.
Yes, yes, you can say that. You can say that. Yes. Some
It
people have it
is.
naturally. Some others,
Yeah,
it's
natural. So, um, so for one to even consider being in that profession to start with, you must be very empathetic, very, because you can encounter cases that it's just your empathy that will drive you. Okay, it's just your empathy that will drive you to keep on in that case. You consider the parents, you consider the stakeholders, you consider that, oh, this is a unique individual, and then empathy drives you. So, right? So for the teachers in the classroom, I believe that every teacher, every instructor must have that element of empathetic nature in them. Yes, we humans are empathetic by nature, but I know that it can vary. So empathy is quite integral in the sense that it's what will drive the school administrator, the teachers involved, the professionals involved to not to give up on a case. So you find out, okay, let me digress a little. Let me digress a little. For example, dyslexia, right? Learners that are dyslexic. You find out just like autism, if you're not careful, you can give up easily on a dyslexic learner without knowing that these are very intelligent people. So from majority of them, we have produced scientists, so many world renowned professionals. Okay, so it's it's actually empathy that will help to come to that stage where you continue as a practitioner, as a teacher, as an instructor. You even try to research more to, maybe there are times that a known a known routine, a known procedure may not work, right? It might work for one, and you now try it on another, and it didn't work. It's empathy that will drive you to start exploring other ones. If not, you are going to give up. Yeah. It's quite important, very, very important.
I mean, very, very important, as you have said, and you have highlighted how it serves as a motivation to keep going when it comes to the process of ensuring that children with spectrum and learning. Empathy, we cannot emphasize the importance of empathy. You have done justice highlighting how it is the fear that keeps the engine running when it comes to raising these children. We are going to look at empathy from now a different light, right? There's a responsibility that educators have, but also I like to believe that there's a responsibility that the parents have, right? The parents ensuring that the child who grows, creating an environment straight from the point of the home. How can educators and parents collaborate effectively? And how can schools engage parents effectively to ensure that the attempts to reach children in the school environment is replicated at the level of the home to ensure that this trainings or this learnings that are being implemented in the school is continued at home to foster this inclusion and ensure it's a continued process from the educational environment to the home environment. How can schools engage parents better to help them get involved in fostering inclusion while raising a child on the spectrum?
Okay, thank you very much. Like we earlier stated, parents and all stakeholders, they have a very big role to play in this. And I want to say, first of all, the people that at the foundational stage of this child life or this learner's life are the parents or the caregiver or the guardian, right? So they should be able to advocate for their child's need. They should be able to advocate for it. Okay, so not forcefully, but they know their their world better. They know their child better than any other person. And if they are able to advocate for their needs, they should be able to communicate effectively on that need. Sometimes it's the parents that gives you clue, right? It's the parent that can give other stakeholders clue of how this learner, you know, behaves, or though you can deduce their behavior professionally and all of that, but the parents have a big role to play. Sometimes they can even give you information that you need to work with. Yes. So they should be carried along, both the parents, the school should carry the parents along in everything. So parents, on the other hand, should also be able to reinforce skills and routines at home. Okay, those skills are those social skills that the early intervention centers and the other and even the mainstream classroom have been um, able to structure these learners with. So parents should have a knowledge of it and reinforce it at home. So it shouldn't slide. So when they come back, there should be continuous practice, there should be continuous reinforcement. They should, and they are basically individuals that and they thrive on routines. So if you want to get an autistic learner distorted and become confused, if you change routines often, it will affect them. So parents should know what is going on in the classroom and follow through at home. And they should also participate in IEP meetings, like IEP, Individualized Education Plan meetings. Okay, so this is not what it's specifically for just one group of people. Every stakeholders, if we want to produce a holistic child that is dependent, regardless of being on the spectrum, right? Then every stakeholders involved, all hands must be on deck. Yes.
Well said, madam. Well said, madam. I want to take you back to something you had said earlier, because I feel like I think we've done quite some time in the conversation, and you said this at the earlier stage. So for people who probably have not joined, let's talk about very practical things that can be implemented in classroom. You had already highlighted some. I'd like you to take that again and lay more emphasis, extensive emphasis on these practical things that can be implemented in mainstream classrooms today to support children on the spectrum.
Okay. When we talk about inclusion, right? Inclusively now. Okay, so we talk about the universal design for learning. I've tried to explain that a little bit, using multiple means of representation, visuals, audio, text, and all of that. And then I talked about differentiated instruction as well. Okay, so in this differentiated instruction, it has to do with adjusting content, adjusting process and output, right? So it has to do with flexibility also, right? It has to do with flexibility and being able to adapt lesson pace and complexity, if we may put it that way. Okay, so differentiated instruction is something, it cannot be overemphasized. So it depends on what works for each classroom when it comes to differentiated instruction. And differentiated instruction has to also be considered in the area of the learning stage of that child, right? So it's the learning stage that will determine the kind of differentiated instruction that should be given, right? So an autistic learner that is just coming out from the early intervention center and is just, let's say, 4 to 5 years old, the differentiated instruction for this learner will be quite different. And the differentiated instruction that should be administered to a learner that is 8 to 9, 10 years old should also be different depending on the subject areas. And that is why teachers have to be trained, even not just general holistic training, but even subject specified training, right? Subject-based training. Okay, an autistic learner, how do we differentiate instruction for him or her in a literacy class, in a physics class, in a science class, in a math class? So that knowledge should come based on the area of learning. So the knowledge for differentiated instruction for autistic learner, when it comes to arithmetic, the arithmetic teacher should be able to know, okay, what to do in order to produce a very good differentiated instruction for this learner. The literacy learner, the literacy learner should be able to know. The science learner, the literacy teacher rather should be able to know. The science teacher should be able to know. The general subjects and government and all of that, commercial subjects teachers, they should be able to know. So when it comes to, but we are not just looking at it when we are talking about autism and the special education needs, we concentrate more in for those that are in early years and primary school, because that's where you even start. Okay, if you miss it at that stage, I don't know how they can cope in the secondary, right? So our concentration on most of the time is on early years and primary. But I'm just mentioning these subject areas. Anyway, sciences and all of that, those subjects are done in primary school also, just that in secondary school, they have it differentiated, like physics, chemistry, and all of that. So, okay, so differentiated instruction is very, very, very important and necessary. Then in that classroom also, there should be communication support. There should be communication support because we have verbal and non-verbal autistic learners, right? Most times, some non-verbal may not really cope very maximally for inclusion. Some of them that are on a severe spectrum, so, but there are ones that are verbal, but even though they are verbal, yet their communication is not strong, right? So communication support should be integrated. Okay, there are, that's where you look for speech therapists. Yes, that's where you look for speech therapists. Then if and then other areas too, other support system like using visual supports. Yes, in fact, you can teach an autistic learner effectively without integrating enough visual supports like charts, flashcards, and all of that. Okay, so so that when you communicate, they have to be trained. Even the teachers that handle them in the classroom should be trained on the method and the way to communicate with them. Okay, the way you talk to a non-neurodivergent learner. Okay, you can tell a non-neurodivergent learner. So, can you look up at the board and listen, please? And a non-neurodivergent learner will get exactly what you mean, right? Yeah, an autistic learner, the communication might be different for him to know what you want him to do. Okay, so you don't impose communication on them the way you interact with others. So it's a training on its own. That communication support is a training on its own. right? So there is also what I call sensory friendly strategies. What do I mean by this? As they grow, they are more prone to be more sensitive to loud noise, sounds, bright lights. Okay, so to create an inclusive learning environment, because we are talking about inclusion here. So if we are really keen and ready to create an inclusive learning environment, either as an institution, as a college, as a school, as a platform, then everything should be on stage, everything should be considered. For example, when we talk about those sensory friendly strategies, we can create calm corners that are quiet enough, maybe when they're confused, and then they start showing signs of defiance and all of that. We can create a calm corner. It's part of inclusion. We can get sensory tools. It's part of inclusion. We can adjust our environment, okay, and making it less noisy. We know that every school, because kids are there must be noise. But because we are talking about inclusion, we can make out approaches or device approaches to make sure that there is a kind of sensory friendly environment, because we already know that they are prone to be sensory sensitive. Okay, so that is another way to help. Another way to help again, it's through technology. You know that some autistic learners are actually they have obsessions, if I may say that, if might put it that way. They're most time fixated on some certain things, right? Some of them are fixated on games, computer stuff. In fact, there are some of them that are very good with ICT, very good with ICT. So they have fixations, and most of their fixations are not bad. They are something that can be explored. There's something that their strength that can be explored in order to help them, right? So yes. So positive behavior support is also very important. Okay, positive behavior support. In positive behavior support, we have the need for constant positive reinforcement, right? So autistic learners should not just be when maybe coming out from an early intervention center and then going to the mainstream classroom. Okay, we have tried our best. Now go to the mainstream classroom. Whatever happens there, let it be. No, the support should be continuous. All the stakeholders must be there. The early intervention center practitioners must be in their life. There must be, and one thing that also helps is daily observation for them, right? For all special need learners, um, every stakeholder involved should try as much as possible to have a structure, to always put their observations in writing, because it can help you when you notice something today and then you notice another thing. You can refer to what you have noticed before. So there should be documentation all the time, all the time. Okay.
I like how extensive you were with this, thoroughly answering and highlighting all the practice strategies that can be implemented in an environment to aid and amplify inclusive learning. You spoke about visual learning, the picture exchange communication system, use of text. You spoke about the use of technology too, because we understand that it's not just the fact that for the autistic, the children, technology, the advancements of technology is literally a big thing globally.
Yeah.
You highlighted how important to recognize when avenue for children to learn from and maximize it extensively. You are just sensory friendly environment and everything, and you have extensively answered that question. Consider that a very important part of this conversation. We've been on here for about an hour and we'll be rounding off pretty shortly. We have some questions which we'll be rolling out in a bit, but I wanted to ask how can schools and schools who who lack the adequate funding done some of these practical strategies that you have implemented, but still have access to raising the children? What are the basic things that these schools can do to help support, even if it's a temporary? But what are basic steps that schools who might lack the adequate funding, what are basic steps that they can implement to help support inclusive learning, even if it's on a temporary basis?
Okay. So, the school that might lack adequate funding, one beautiful thing about this is that to start, you don't really need a lot. If you want to offer help, you don't need a lot to start. Okay, training is one necessary aspect of it. Okay, if the school maybe doesn't have enough financial capacity to get some materials, technological equipment, and all of that, and maybe um, tailor or have a kind of same integrated approach into the learning. I think there is somewhere they can start, and one of the ways they can start, or one area they can start with is in training. Okay, so they can train their stakeholders. Knowledge, they say, is power, right? So ignorance of a thing is already a sure way to defeat. Yeah, if you are ignorant about something, even if they get all the things and pay all the high funds and equip the area so well with a very vast financial capacity, and the knowledge of what to do or how to even use those things is not there, is still equal to doing nothing. So basically they can start with trainings, awareness, sensitization. If one, two, or three people in that school environment are well equipped knowledgeably on what it entails, I think they have done 50% of the work.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Absolutely beautifully said, madam. I love how you have addressed that. Trainings highlight, as you have said, more than 50% of the work, and that is very important. Speaking of trainings, at the EK Foundation for Autism, we are putting together a parents and caregiver training on speech and behavior management. It is happening this weekend, 23rd of August, Saturday particularly. It's going to feature a certification for parents, caregivers, educators, therapists, and everybody who is interested in learning more and equipping themselves with the required knowledge to managing speech and behavior management. We're putting together at the early intervention center this. You can surf through our social media platforms for more information. You see the numbers to call to get yourself registered and acquainted. It's going to be introduction to equipment that help manage behavioral and speech trading. It's going to be teaching you about managing tantrums and meltdowns in children, amongst many.
Yeah, awesome. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yes. So much for your time. We have some questions. I'll run through them. The first is by Francis Oko. Francis is asking, kindly speak on the difference between inclusion and mainstreaming. Inclusion and mainstreaming.
Okay. The difference between inclusion and
Yes,
mainstream.
mainstreaming. Yes.
Okay, actually, when we talk about inclusion, we are talking about inclusion in the mainstream classroom, right? So the mainstream here might not be a classroom, it can be other learning platforms, right? yet. So, but the inclusion we are talking about is what needs to be done in that platform that is called mainstream. The things that how the learning can be structured inclusively in that platform called mainstream, and which we have already highlighted over time.
Well said, madam. Well said. So inclusion in mainstream. So mainstream is like the regular environment, and we're talking on how to include the children in mainstream. Absolutely brilliant, madam. We want to say we've had you on here now. We do not want to keep you any longer because we recognize schedules that can be tight. But more than anything, we genuinely appreciate you for your time. This has been a thoroughly educating conversation from my end. I like how you've highlighted extensively practical steps that can be implemented in an educated environment, in a school environment. We've also addressed what teachers and educators and caregivers should be well aware about. You also extensively spoke to the rules of while ensuring that inclusion is fostered for children on the spectrum. For that reason, we genuinely appreciate you. If you have any final words as we wrap up, I will give you a platform to do that. And final words
All right.
from parents, caregivers, and therapists alike.
All right, thank you very much. EK Foundation for Autism. It's been an honor to be hosted here to share my view about these things. So I do not I appreciate that, and I want to encourage all stakeholders and learning platforms and institutions to keep on holding on to these beliefs, and look out for knowledge, go for trainings, and become versatile in what to do, especially if you're a school administrator, especially if you are a stakeholder like a principal, or a psychologist. And why I talk this way is that every profession that has to do with lives, it's is one that has to be handled with utmost care, right? So this profession is about lives. Okay, so since it's about lives, I think all hands should be on deck in making the right thing to be done. I'm impressed to be able to advocate for this and to share my knowledge in a little way. Because if we start talking about this, we may not even end it in the next 3 hours, So, but I'm happy to be able to air my views in this little way. And thank you very much, sir. I appreciate this, and hopefully we keep on doing this.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep on doing this. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard from Madam Maka herself extensively addressing the importance, wrapping up by addressing the importance of knowledge. There's this popular saying that knowledge is power. Madam Maka has reminded us on the importance of the empowerment via knowledge, and that can change everything. My name is Epic, and this has been another amazing episode of Lend Your Voice 1000 Voices for Autism, proudly brought to you by EK Foundation for Autism. Till we catch you next time, ladies and gentlemen. And it is adios. Have one. Bye, madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.